Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you guys are doing fantastic today. It's 7 p.m. here in Viking. So setting things up for now. The show's going to start soon. I see Chris Scott over there. So thanks for tuning in.
Stay tuned. We're going to be starting in about 2 minutes, maybe 1 minute. And yeah, put your questions in the comments, and I'll get to them as best as I can after, because I'll probably be up there while this is going on. Anyway, that is from Chris's separate stream snap 9. Good?
Start?
Okay, I'm going to switch the cameras.
Are we good to go? Okay. I just want to officially welcome you all to this wonderful evening. I think you're going to have a great time here. There are great speakers who are going to share a lot about the facts of Alberta's independence and what we're seeking, what some of the consequences might be. Just before we go into the meeting, just a few housekeeping rules, or not rules, but you don't have to. Over there, okay. There are washrooms outside that door for anybody who needs to use the washroom, and there are emergency exits on both sides at the back of the room. There's going to be 3 speakers this evening. And so we're asking that everybody keep their comments and their questions until the 3rd speaker is finished, and then we're going to have a Q&A, and then you will be able to come up and express your comments or ask any questions that you'd like. We're going to start. 3 of the pillars for Alberta's independence are faith, family, and freedom. And so we're going to start off with prayer. And then I will hand it over to Sheane. So, Father, we just thank you for your presence here. Father, we need your wisdom. We need clarity. And so I pray that you will open the eyes of everyone here, open our ears and especially our hearts, that we might know and discern truth. And then, Father, have the energy and the will to do something about it. I ask your blessing upon the speakers, that you will give them the words that they need to speak tonight. And we thank you, God, that all this can be done in your name. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good evening. Before I get started, I've been asked to mention we're going to have a couple of gentlemen pass around a couple of donation bins. If you can give, that'd be greatly appreciated. We're running this whole entire tour entirely on the grassroots help assisting us. So if you can give, that would be greatly appreciated. I will get the two gentlemen to do that. Also, over on that same table, there is a sign-in book. If you don't mind signing in, there's actually two. One is for you to sign in as being here. And that way, if there's anything significant come up, we can send out a newsletter to you. There's another book right beside it. If you can volunteer at all, we need as many volunteers as we can to make this a great success. So with that having been said, I will get into my speech. What I talk about is Alberta's relationship with Ottawa from before we were ever a province. And I do touch on just a few of the quick things. If I was to do it, I would be here for hours and hours if I was talking about the imbalance. So from about 1880 to 1903, 1904, there was the great American settler movement here at that time it was the Northwest Territories. And there were a huge movement of settlers that wanted to become part of the United States. And that was one of the reasons that Alberta was actually formed, because it's easier to absorb a territory into another country than it is a province. So that was one of the reasons that they actually formed Alberta and Saskatchewan, was to put a buffer between the territories and the United States. And how many of you know the little spit on the map that I live near called USONA? Well, do you know what USONA stands for? The United States of North America. The town of Rimbey, its original name was Kansas Ridge. The city of Airdrie, its original name was Yankee Valley. All throughout Alberta and Saskatchewan, you will find towns that either still have an American sounding name or used to have an American sounding name. And that it was a huge movement. Believe it or not, USONA, which now has a population of about 6, I think, at one point in time had over 500 people live there. And up until we became a province, they were moving to try to become part of the United States. In 1903, the then Minister of the Interior, Clifford Sifton, made the following statement. He was the one that actually was one of the authors of the Alberta Act and Saskatchewan Acts. And he said, "We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people to the east, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way to our prosperity." This is the gentleman that helped write those two acts. So right from the get-go, we were looked at as the lesser. In 1905, on September 1st, the Alberta Act and Saskatchewan Act came out, and they were exactly identical except for Alberta and Saskatchewan. How many people have had a chance to ever read the Alberta Act? Nobody. I would encourage you to go to the Government of Alberta's website and download a copy of it and read it. It is fascinating because when that was written, we were given the name of a province, but we were given the rights and responsibilities of a territory. And we have been fighting ever since to get the rights of a province. In 1913, the West was booming, and they came up with the Railroad Act Amendment. Now, what did the Railroad Act Amendment do? The Railroad Act Amendment made it illegal for a regional railway to cross provincial lines. So, how many of you have driven down Taylor Drive in Red Deer? You'll see that pillar that says Alberta Central Railway. That was one of the largest railways in central Alberta. And this act basically put them out of business. They were able to hang on until 1929, and then they went out, and all of the local railways, because what that meant is it wasn't just that they couldn't cross, their engines couldn't cross the provincial lines. Let's say you loaded in Stettler, heading to Thunder Bay, at every provincial border, it actually had to be unloaded from the car and moved to another. So it was very hard on locals. And by 1930, every single one of them was out of business from Manitoba border. But coincidentally enough, they made it so that the Eastern railways were exempt. But in 1940, the assets started being bought up by what we now know as Canadian National Railways. And they were built on the back of all of the Western railways that were put out of business. In 1930, the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement was written, and it gave all of the resources to the control of the provinces. But they made it so that the Western provinces, once again, were not entitled to the same rights that the Eastern provinces were. And we've been, once again, fighting ever since to get those rights back. In 1931, on December 11th, the Statute of Westminster was decreed by the King and came into and addressed by the House of Lords in the UK. And it gave the land and resources of Canada to the people of Canada in care of the provinces, not in care of the federal government, in care of the provinces. What that means at this point in time is there shouldn't be a single national park in this province. They do not have the right to have federal land in this province. And if we were to enforce that, we wouldn't have had Jasper happen, because we would have done a lot better job of managing that forest than the federal government did. In 1935, the Canada Wheat Board was formed as a voluntary marketing board. But by 1943, it became mandatory for Western Canadians. And we would have still been under control of that board, except that we had a bunch of brave farmers in the early 2000s decide that it was worth going to jail for, and they ran the border. So what the Wheat Board did is, if you lived in Ontario and you wanted to sell to the United States, or anywhere else for that matter, but the United States is a better example to do it, you could pull around to your grain bin, offload your grain or unload your grain onto your truck, drive to the States and sell it. If you were in Western Canada, you had to pull around to your grain bin, load up, go to the local elevator, offload it, sell it to the Wheat Board, pull around to the other side of the elevator, reload, and buy it back from them at an increase. And then you could sell it to the States. So you weren't allowed to direct market your own grains, but it was only from the Manitoba border westward that it was in effect. And it came to an end finally in 2012, and it was because of those farmers that ran the border. There were 6 farmers that went to jail for 6 months each, and they won us that right back, where they got rid of that marketing board. From 1947 to 1950, you had the federal control of oil pricing and pipelines. Now, if you noticed, back in 1930, they gave the rights of the resources to the provinces. Well, in 1947, they decided that they were going to set our prices. They were going to tell us who we could market to. And they held that until 1950. In 1965, now I'm going to go really quick over this one. In 1965, the reason I'm going to go quick is because Michael has it in his talk too. Just so you'll get more information on it shortly. The Great Flag Debate happened. Now, how many are old enough that they remember the Great Flag Debate? I started school in the early 70s, and by the early 70s, it had been memory hold. We did not hear anything about it in school. But in 1965, It was such a large issue that in 1967, most of the Western towns and cities still read during the Confederation celebration, they still flew the red ensign flag. But what happened is they brought out the maple leaf, and not a single Western MP voted for that flag. And the reason being, as Diefenbaker said, was that this flag does not represent the West. This flag represents the East only, as the sugar maple is found only in Eastern Canada. And it was brought to closure and forced to vote on it, and they rammed it down the West's throat. And like I said, Michael will go into this quite a bit more later. So then in 1973 to 1974, they brought in the oil export taxation policies, and they capped Alberta's oil production. So this was the precursor to the next thing that I'll talk about. But what they did is it basically said that we could not produce anything more than a certain amount of barrels. And if we did, all those profits went to the East. We did not get to keep them. So it was an artificially killed our oil industry for a year. But thankfully, Peter Lougheed fought them on that, and they repealed it after 1 year. But they weren't done with us yet, because in 1980, they brought in the National Energy Program, which was this same program, but on steroids. So that meant, in addition to telling us all that stuff and capping our oil production, we had to sell it to the East at a price set by Ottawa. We could not sell it anywhere else until the East's needs were met, which basically, throughout the 80s, it killed our oil industry. And in 1988, it was finally repealed under Brian Mulroney, but it was not repealed because he was magnanimous towards the West. It was repealed because oil prices had dropped so far down that it cost more to administer the program than they were getting back out of it. So that was the only reason that they repealed the National Energy Program. In the 1980s and 90s, we had Quebec try to do independence. We had the Constitution come home, but none of those, they did have direct effect on Western Canada, but they were a lot smaller details. And like I said, if I go into everything, it's going to take me hours and hours to do so. But if we jump forward to 2012, they brought in Bill C-38, which is the Jobs, Growth, and Prosperity Act, which gave Ottawa control over all of Alberta's projects. We could not build a highway, we could not build anything in this province without the permission of the federal government, which is against the Constitution, but it didn't matter. And under that, it was under a Conservative government that was brought in. So it doesn't matter who we have in Ottawa. They're going to pander to the East instead of to the West, because our votes don't count from the Manitoba border westward. It's decided on election day before it ever gets here. In 2016, they brought in the federal carbon pricing, which once again killed our oil industry. They're slowly starting to recover from it, but it has totally changed how we do the oil industry in this province. And that one is from provincial right up to federal with all this carbon pricing. And then in 2019, they brought in Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines, and Bill C-48, the tanker ban on the West Coast, and they were enacted. And what that did is it put the final nail in the coffin for most of Alberta's oil industry. And we would be booming if those two hadn't come into play. Now, there's been a few things that have happened in the last few months. A lot of people weren't happy with the MOU that Danielle signed with Carney, but it doesn't matter whether you agree with it or not. The House of Commons voted to defeat it. So that's not coming into play anyways. So we're still under all of these bills, even though they had come to an agreement to lift all of them. So unless we do something drastic, and in my opinion, that will be independence, we will never get out from underneath Ottawa's thumb. I thank you very much, and the next speaker will be Dr. Michael Wagner, and he will come and he will tell a little bit more about history and the like.
Don't worry, he's coming. He's coming.
So we just had some technical difficulties because of some kind of audio technical things that I don't understand. But anyway, do you want to adjust this a bit? Okay, keep going or? Okay. So what I want to talk about tonight is to say that Alberta independence is the way to preserve what was best about Canada. Now, Canada was once a very great country. For its first 100 years or so, Canada was known for exceptional national projects. We built a railway across the northern part of the continent. We built a country out of a rough and cold wilderness. We turned this wilderness into a prosperous and vibrant community. And our military was known for its effectiveness in both world wars. But since the 1960s, Canada has changed. Liberal leaders decided to remake Canada into a different kind of country, one that prioritized leftist social engineering over the country's historic identity and achievements. Now, that transformation had various critics, various patriotic Canadians who criticized it, and one of the best critics was Ted Byfield, the founder of Alberta Report magazine, and some of you are probably old enough to remember Alberta Report magazine. Anyway, Ted Byfield himself grew up in Toronto, and then he came out west, and he became a very passionate Alberta patriot. And as an Alberta patriot, he criticized what the Liberals had done to our country. Now, one of the things he pointed out was when he was growing up in Toronto, which had probably been about the 1930s or so, Canadians at that time thought of themselves as British North Americans. And our flag at that time was, either the Union Jack or the red ensign that Sheane mentioned, which had the Union Jack in the upper corner. Now, the Union Jack consists of three crosses: the Cross of St. George from England, the Cross of St. Andrew from Scotland, and the Cross of St. Patrick from Ireland. So it's the three crosses make up that Union Jack. So it's an explicitly Christian symbol because it's based on the three crosses, the three Christian crosses from those different countries. And so Britain and Canada had an explicitly Christian flag up until that time. But as Sheane mentioned, in 1965, Prime Minister Lester Pearson changed our flag and gave us our current flag with the red maple leaf. And of course, as Sheane mentioned, the sugar maple that the leaf grows on does not even grow in Western Canada, so it doesn't really represent us. But what's symbolic, though, in replacing the flag, it's symbolic of the change that was coming to Canada. We were turning away from our historic history and identity and turning towards a new kind of country. Now, when you weaken the national identity of a country, people will still want to identify with something. So in Canada, many Canadians then began to identify with their region or their province because they didn't identify as much with the national government as it was changing our identity. Now, the reason this is important is because Albertans who support independence are sometimes accused of being disloyal to Canada, but that's not true. Albertans who support independence are often those who remember and deeply love the Canada that existed before the Liberals wrecked it. Now, by 1980 already, there was basically two Canadas. There was old Canada and new Canada. That's when Prime Minister Trudeau, he'd been in power for several years. And Ted Byfield, again, talked about how we had these two Canadas. And he said how basically old Canada was founded by Sir John A. Macdonald, who gave us a constitution in 1867. That was one country. And then the new Canada was founded by Pierre Trudeau, who gave us a different constitution in 1982. So you have two leaders, two constitutions, and two essentially different countries. Now, there's certain practical outworkings of these two countries, and I want to read what Ted Byfield did to explain how the two countries are different. Old Canada had some harsh laws but was safe to live in. New Canada has enlightened, lenient laws and is increasingly unsafe to live in. Old Canada was generally committed to the free enterprise system, modified where necessary. New Canada is increasingly committed to the socialist system, magnified where unnecessary. Old Canada met its military obligations, in fact served magnificently in 2 world wars. New Canada has virtually no army and has reneged on its military obligations. Old Canada was frugal and poor but paid its way. New Canada runs at a $14 billion deficit. Now, $14 billion, that's in 1980 dollars, so it'd be a much bigger figure today. But what we see here, we're talking about two very different countries, Old Canada and New Canada. So when people say, well, you're being disloyal to Canada, the question really is, which Canada are you being loyal or disloyal to? And this is a question that Ted Byfield wrote about. He said, when people put the question, are you loyal to Canada? I have to ask, to which Canada? The one we used to know, or the one which Mr. Trudeau is forcing upon us? I certainly felt part of the first, but that country doesn't seem to be there anymore. About the second, I have grave doubts. So again, it's not a question of being disloyal to Canada. It's a question of determining which Canada to be loyal to. You can only be loyal to Old Canada or New Canada. You have to be loyal to one or the other. You can't be loyal to both at the same time. But Pierre Trudeau transformed Canada into a different kind of country, one that is no longer recognizable to many of us. So how did Trudeau transform our country so drastically? Since he didn't like the country as it was, how was he able to reshape it into something else? Well, the way to transform a country most comprehensively is to change its constitution. The Constitution is the foundational document of a country that establishes the various governments and their roles and responsibilities and the rights of the citizens. So the Constitution is the most fundamental document. So when you change the Constitution, you change the country. And this is something Pierre Trudeau knew very well. Already in 1968, when he was Justice Minister, he came forward with his proposal for a Charter of Rights for Canada, and the Government of Canada published that proposal as a book format. So Pierre Trudeau was arguing that we did not have our rights guaranteed because they were not explicitly enumerated in a written document. Though the Americans have, like the Bill of Rights, where their rights were explicitly enumerated. In Canada, we followed the British system, where we had our rights, but they weren't actually written into a particular constitutional document. You know, we remember back to even up to 1968, there was no country in Canada, there was no country in the world that protected human rights better than Canada. Just because our rights were not written directly into the Constitution does not mean we had rights. We were as good or better than any other country in the world that way. But Trudeau wanted to convince people that we had to have a document with our rights written into it, otherwise we didn't have those guarantees. So he had an easy sell to Canadians. He said, don't you want your rights written into the Constitution? And who was going to say no? So for the most part, people agreed, yes, let's have our rights written into the Constitution. And so the Charter itself was popular, and Trudeau was able to get his Charter adopted in 1982. But one of the important things about the Charter, though, is it was adopted in 1982, but the equality rights section of it was actually postponed. It didn't come into effect until 1985, and that was so that each of the governments of Canada, the provincial governments and the federal governments, they could bring their various laws into conformity to the Charter before it came into effect, so that it wouldn't lead to a whole bunch of court cases against those various pieces of legislation. So in 1985, the Charter was going to come into full effect, and at that time, our Justice Minister was John Crosbie. So we had the Brian Mulroney government, and John Crosbie was the Minister of Justice. So he's the one who's in the Justice portfolio when the Charter is about to become into full effect. And this is what he said to Canadians at that time. The public does not realize that we already have had a revolution in Canadian society. The adoption of a Charter was a revolution. It has changed the whole power structure of Canadian society. It has taken tremendous power from governments and given it to the courts of Canada, the Supreme Court of Canada, which is not widely realized. Therefore, we are in a whole new legal environment in Canada. There has been a revolutionary change. So now the Charter is about to be fully into effect in Canada, and they're telling us it's going to be a revolutionary change. Like nobody said we're going to have a revolutionary change before that time when we were talking about whether to adopt it or not. We didn't know it at that time that it was going to bring so much change. So over the next few years, the Supreme Court would strike down all kinds of federal and provincial legislation on the basis of the Charter because of that change that was brought in. So the Charter was supposed to just protect our rights, but what it also did, or probably did more so, was it involved a fundamental restructuring of our country, a revolutionary change. So Dr. William Gardner in 1994, he wrote that the Charter was, quote, an entire state enterprise for the reshaping of Canada. He went on to write that Pierre Trudeau viewed the Constitution, quote, as a means to the achievement of some ideal state, an instrument for forcing society into a predetermined social and political mold. This is exactly what Pierre Trudeau achieved. With his so-called Charter of Rights, he essentially refounded Canada as a different country, one that fit his ideological program. Each and every day, courts across Canada enforce Trudeau's vision of Canada using his Charter of Rights. So in this sense, Pierre Trudeau rules Canada from the grave. He is dead but not gone. His ideology continues to shape our country and will continue to do so thanks to the Charter. And actually, I got a very good example of that from the National Post last week, or 3 weeks ago. This is a column from the National Post from January 29, 2026, so yeah, about 3 weeks ago or so. And it's by Ted Morton. Now, Ted Morton was a political scientist at the University of Calgary for several decades. Then he became a cabinet minister in Alberta's government. So this column he wrote is called, "The Charter is Gutting the Provinces, and the Data Proves It." And his column is based upon a study done by the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. So what happens, the provinces adopt various laws during each year. Some of those laws are challenged and end up going to the Supreme Court of Canada. And in many cases, the Supreme Court strikes down those provincial laws on the basis of the Charter. So this has been going on since the Charter was implemented in 1985, like it finally came into effect. So every year, the powers, the provincial powers of the provinces are reduced gradually, year after year, by the Supreme Court. And this was Pierre Trudeau's objective. He wanted to reduce the power of the provinces to increase the power of the federal government. And this process, even though he's been dead for 25 years, the process continues, and his ideological program continues on and on as our provinces continue to lose their powers from the Charter. Now, so he changed the country by changing the Constitution. And I also want to talk a little bit here about how, Pierre and Justin Trudeau changed the idea of Canadian identity. Now, to do this, I want to read a long quote by Ted Byfield, kind of explaining an idea, a particular conception of Canadian identity, one that many of us would recognize who are older. This is kind of like looking at Canadian identity from a historic perspective. So this is how Ted Byfield envisioned our identity. Then I want to contrast this with what's going on with the Trudeaus afterwards. So this is what Ted Byfield wrote. For what, when you get right down to it, is the national heritage? How did we get here? Are we not a people who crossed the seas, pushed back the forests, charted the rivers and lakes, rammed the railways through the mountains, broke the prairies, and tamed the barrens of the Arctic? Are we not a people who found gold in the Precambrian, oil in the Beaufort, and grew food for the world where men could hitherto scarcely find food enough for themselves? Are we French? Are we English? We are both, and German, Polish, Ukrainian, Dutch, Chinese, and who knows what else. Why did we come here? For most, there was a single answer: land. For land, the Carignan-Solier Regiment established the first substantial settlement in Quebec. For land, the Loyalists came. For land, the Eastern Europeans peopled the Western Prairie. For land, the Chinese built with their blood the railways. The Japanese opened the fishery, and the Jews of Russia created Winnipeg's North End and the 1,000 cultural endeavors that have flowed from it. What all these people wanted, in other words, was private property, safe from expropriation, safe from tax collectors, safe from thief and marauder. Property that is meant freedom, and freedom was worth life itself. What did we believe? We believed in God. Religion was either the chief motive for or indispensable companion of almost every settlement. It was both puritanical and authoritarian, be it the authority of the Bible or the authority of the church. It was narrow, intolerant of nonconformity, and quick to condemn what it viewed as corruptive, but it was not anti-intellectual. Religion, in fact, established our school system. And a tough system it was, sparing neither rod nor child. It knew its goals, and against them it examined a pupil and teacher remorselessly, overworking both. Indeed, work was a thing it reveled in, lots of it, with back and brain dawn to long past darkness, men, women, and children included. If a man would work, he should live. If he would not work, he should starve. If he could not work, it was up to the community to care for him, generously and positively, with the hope that he would one day care for himself. With the faith came the family. In families we arrived. In families we divided the land. In families we saw our children grow and prosper. In families we found companionship, purpose, comfort, warmth, guidance, and an occasional clout on the ear. Was the mother of this family exploited and oppressed? She certainly was. Being exploited and oppressed was at once her burden, her privilege, and her delight. That's what motherhood was about. In fact, in a sense, that's what the whole family was about. Either you believed in it or you didn't. We believed in it so much we quite readily fought for it, whether in the schoolyard or in the trenches, for we are indeed a fighting nation. Scarcely had the first shots been fired when we plunged into 2 world wars, years before the Americans, and those years we spent berating them for their backsliding cowardice. We left our blood and bones on the slopes of Vimy Ridge until we had hacked our way to the top of it, something the army of no other nation had been able to do. We were tied to posts and bayoneted at Hong Kong. We tore through the skies in the Battle of Britain, and we littered Germany with the corpses of our bomber crews. But these were wars of justice, and we won them. We do not apologize for this. So this conception of Canadian identity that Ted Byfield's talking about, he's talking about how our ancestors came here for land and for freedom. Many of them were very committed to their religion, usually Christianity. They believed in the traditional family, and they were very proud of their strong military, of Canada's strong military. That's like our historic identity as Canadians. But Pierre Trudeau did not like our identity that way. He wanted to change it. So what have the Liberals brought in instead? Well, if you remember when Justin Trudeau was elected in 2015, shortly thereafter he was interviewed by the New York Times. The New York Times interviewed Justin Trudeau, and Justin Trudeau told the New York Times that Canada is a country with no core identity. He said we were the first post-national state. And the New York Times praised him as the avatar of his father's vision. So Justin Trudeau was like the fulfillment of his father's vision. This is what they wanted to do, to make us into a country without a core identity, a post-national state. So instead of the historical identity that Ted Byfield talked about, the Liberals wanted to replace that with abstract universal concepts. Replace our identity with abstract universal concepts. Diversity, tolerance, inclusivity, multiculturalism. That's the Liberal conception of Canadian identity. Erase what our past was and have universal, abstract concepts instead. So that's the new Canada. But many people still remember the old Canada and what it meant. We want our country back. This is why we support Alberta independence. Good old Canada has vanished. In its place, we have new Trudeau Canada, which reeks of wokeism, socialism, and an emerging police state. But an independent Alberta can and will uphold the noble traditions and freedoms of the original Canadian dream. Thank you. I'm supposed to introduce our next speaker, Chris Scott. This is the legendary Chris Scott. I'm sure I don't have to give you any details about him. He's a folk hero, and everybody here probably knows who he is. So welcome, Chris Scott.
Green. Okay, well, hello everybody. My name is Chris Scott. I am a business owner from a little town called Muir, Alberta. I have a little diner truck stop called the Whistle Stop Cafe, and that's kind of who I am. I'm a dad. I'm an Albertan. I'm not university educated. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not any of those things. All I am is a guy who cares deeply about not only my future, but my kids' future and the province that I live in. I was originally born in BC, and I moved to Alberta in 2000 because the second NDP government in my teenage years caused so much damage and destruction to my province that we were fighting for $6.90 an hour minimum wage jobs. But one of my friends had been in Alberta for a while, and every time he came home, he had these fancy new things called DVDs and a DVD player and leather couches, and I was like, man, I want a DVD. So I guess I better go to Alberta too. Well, I never left, obviously. And I realized when I got here that I'm actually an Albertan. I just was mistakenly born in British Columbia, but I remedied that in 2000 and never looked back. Anyway, that's a little bit about me. I want to know something about you tonight. First, I'll say thank you for coming. But I want to know how many people here have never been to a meeting like this before. How many people are first-timers? That's amazing. How many people here are not yet on board with an independent Alberta? This is amazing. This is exactly what we need. Generally, for the past 5 years or so, I've been speaking at events like this. And I always ask that question. I almost always ask that question. And the reason is, I want to kind of get an idea of where we're at as the people of Alberta. And I can tell you, from what I've seen in the last 5 years, Albertans are ready for a change. Even those of you that aren't on board yet with the idea of an independent Alberta, you obviously want some type of change, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Except if you're one of the people that come to spy and do those types of things, but that's fine. If you're here for that reason, I encourage you to post this everywhere, share with your liberal friends that don't like me. I want this message to go to everybody. So you've heard from Sheane and Dr. Wagner some of the contentious points of Alberta's position within Confederation. We've felt these things for years, whether it was through taxation, or maybe you're an oil field worker and you've gone through the boom and bust, as I did. 20 years in the oil patch taught me a real good lesson about government policy. Actually, funny story, in 2019, I lost an oil field job, the best one I've ever had. It was awesome, treated me like a king, made all sorts of money. I lost it for kind of a political thing. And I was like, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm done with the boom and bust. I'm done with the politics. I'm done with the government passing legislation that puts me out of work for 6 months. I'm going to buy a restaurant and just be quiet the rest of my life. The government's not going to influence me too much, and I'm just going to, keep calm and carry on. Well, that was in July 2019. July 2019, I changed careers and became an entrepreneur, a restaurateur, because I was sick of the government sticking their fingers in my life. Well, we all know what happened in early 2020, don't we? Everything changed. And all of a sudden, I found myself in a place where I was facing off against the government, like the full weight of the government. For the entirety of 2020, they told me that I could do this and I couldn't do that. And very quickly we realized that the rules were quite arbitrary. Obviously they weren't doing what they were intended to, but we saw something else happen, and we saw the damage and destruction that the government was causing. By the end of 2020, I was ready to fight. I didn't tell you this yet, but I'm Russian and Irish. So apparently I like to fight. Yeah. Internally lots as well. But I got to the point where I started thinking back to my early years in elementary school, specifically with my grade 4 teacher, Mr. Ruda, who we gave a heart attack because we were such little shits, pardon my language. But Mr. Ruda back then, I remember the way he talked about Canada. I remember the way his face lit up when he explained to us little guys and little girls how we lived in the best country on earth because we had a constitution and we had this Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the government gave us all these rights, and we have a Bill of Rights, and we're free and we'll always be free because somebody fought for our freedoms so that we didn't have to. I remember that the excitement in his voice was almost tangible, and I didn't realize why until just about 35, 40 years later. Mr. Ruda had just been part of that, the patriation of our Constitution. And the videos that you watch and the speeches that you hear, people were very excited about it because they believed that this document, this enshrined law was what made us free and what made our country great. And you've heard from Dr. Wagner, I hope you understood what he was saying, that wasn't the case. But here I am at, how old was I then? I was about 40 years old. And I found myself thinking back to that time, like, we live in a free country. How can the government tell me that I can't work? How can the government tell me that I can't go to, a store without covering my face? Even the bank. I mean, just 6 months before that, if you went into the bank with a face covering, you're in big trouble. But I started thinking about these things, and I'd never really thought about them before because nothing had affected me yet. Now, I had been affected by high taxes, bad legislation, terrible politicians, all of those things. They had affected me, but they didn't affect me to the point where I would grab a microphone as a person who doesn't like crowds and stand in front of, I think we have 80, 85 people here tonight. The biggest event that I've spoken at was over 1,800 people. I never did that, even though there was things that upset me about the situation I was in my country, in my province. But when I went through this situation facing off against the government and trying to learn about who I was as a Canadian and as an Albertan and what my rights really were, I came to the astonishing conclusion that it was nothing like Mr. Ruda taught me it was. I realized as I was laying in a jail cell on a concrete slab that I don't have any rights. Because if the government can arbitrarily take my rights away without having to go to court and prove it's necessary first, without me having done anything wrong, I didn't really have any rights. So then I start digging and I start learning and I'm searching for a solution to my problem. And my problem was just that I wanted to go to work. That was my biggest problem. I wanted to work. I wanted to pour coffee, make people hamburgers, and watch their faces light up when they eat the delicious hamburgers at the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta, which has some of the best food in the province, by the way. I'm also a capitalist, in case you haven't noticed. But my journey got me to a place where as I peeled back this onion, and I peeled back the layers, I realized, oh man, I have to do something because what I've seen, now I can't unsee. And then I attended my first meeting with the Alberta Prosperity, what was it called back then? Alberta Unity Project back then, in a shop in Nisku, Alberta, under the cover of darkness, in secret, because back then, to meet for political purpose anywhere with your peers, with fellow human beings, was a crime, right? I never thought that I would be able to say I'm a Canadian citizen and I've attended illegal church services because the government would have arrested me if they caught me going to church. I would have never believed that as a Canadian citizen I would be laying on a cold slab in the drunk tank in Red Deer, Alberta because I committed the crime of protesting what my government was doing peacefully, respectfully, on my own land that I held the deed to. I never would have thought those things. So the culmination of all these things together, my frustration with the things the federal government had done to interfere with the oil patch, and many of you are there as well. Some of you are farmers, and you probably feel that same pain. The frustration of watching, or at the end of the year, looking at how much income tax I paid and realizing that that's more than most Canadians make in a year. That means I was making good money, so I was blessed for that, but it was still painful to watch it disappear. All of those things, together with the realization that the country isn't what I thought it was, that made me get involved in politics. I thought, you know what, we're going to elect a new government. We're going to get rid of this Jason Kenney. We're going to get a new premier, and they're going to fix everything. They're going to save me, because that's what we do. We elect someone to save us, right? Nobody believes that anymore, do you? Well, we went through that. We got rid of Jason Kenney. We elected Danielle Smith. She did a fantastic job with some things. Some things I'm not super excited about, but that's okay. No one's perfect, and maybe some people like everything. But it became painfully obvious that the things that need to change in the country to fix the inequities between the East and the West, between Ottawa and the West, are not possible. And I've heard people say, well, Chris, why don't we just elect a good prime minister and they'll fix everything? Okay, well, we tried that. Actually, before we elected an Albertan prime minister, who, by the way, was one of the contributors to the firewall letter, which was the blueprint on how Alberta could insulate themselves against a federal government, we had a political revival in the 90s. Do you remember when there was a slogan all over the West and it was "The West wants in"? Do you remember that? Do you remember trying and building a new party that represented what the West wanted, that was going to fix the problems within Confederation, elevate us as equal partners, and bring us into Confederation for the first time in years? Do you remember that? It didn't work, did it? A few years later, we elected somebody who knew exactly what had to be done to fix these problems, Stephen Harper, and nothing happened. And we kept on flogging the dead horse, thinking, oh, we just got to elect someone new. We just have to elect someone new. We have to elect someone new. But it's never been about that. The reality is, if we want to fix what's going on, if we want to be equals, if we want to actually be able to feel like our vote matters, we have to change the structure. So let's just change the Constitution, right? I used to be that guy. Dr. Dennis Modry would ask the crowd, how many people here want an independent Alberta? Some people put up their hand. How many people want just more autonomy and everything stay the same? Some people put up their hand. Then he would ask, how many people want to have a referendum on independence so we can use it as leverage to open the Constitution and fix the things that are wrong so we can stay in Canada? And I'd put up my hand. That was my thing. Since then, there's some things that have become painfully obvious. We're not even going to mention, although I will mention, we're not even going to mention that the hurdles for opening and changing the Constitution are almost impossible, and it's that way on purpose. You need 7 out of 10 provinces representing 50% plus 1 of the population to agree to open the Constitution. You need a majority vote in the House of Commons to do it, and if you think that's going to happen, I have a bridge to sell you. If that passes, then you need a majority vote in the Senate to agree, and then finally, you need the Supreme Court by majority vote to agree to open and amend the Constitution. Even if we got past those hurdles right now, and the reason I mentioned the Constitution is because, let me back up a second. The reason I mentioned the Constitution is because the things that need to change so that we can actually have a say in our futures as Albertans are constitutional issues. I think we have 6 senators, something like that. Ontario and Quebec have some in they're in the 30s. We can't do much with the Senate, and they're appointed by mostly Liberal governments. Our ability to elect representatives here is not based on population, by the way. If you look at the numbers on how our representation goes across Canada, it is not equal. Some provinces, they elect 1 MP per 62,000. Some elect an MP for every 44,000. I think we elect an MP for every 114 or 120,000, something like that, people. So that's why during the election, they stop counting at the Manitoba border and call the election. Our votes, they just don't matter. And that is a very, very big problem when you realize that if you live in a place where you can't vote for change, you can't influence the governance that controls everything in your life, basically, that's not a democracy. That's tyranny. So if we can't fix the things that need to be fixed by voting, which is what we're supposed to be able to do, that means we need to fix that whole structure. That's why I talk about opening the Constitution. Now, Sheane mentioned Clifford Sifton's quote about how we and all Canadian patriots desire that the great trade of the prairies go to enrich our lives in the East, build up our factories, workshops, and contribute to our prosperity in every conceivable way. That's poor paraphrasing, but you get the point. It was designed that way. We're living exactly the way it was intended to be. We were intended to be a resource colony with the illusion of self-governance. And that's the way it's been for 120 years in this province. 120 years. And by the way, we didn't even get a say in whether or not we wanted to join Confederation. Oftentimes people will say, if we were an independent nation right now, free of Canada, and Canada came to us and said, hey, will you join our Confederation under the current, like the terms we have right now? Will you? And nobody would. It's absolutely ludicrous. Would you go from a self-governing sovereign nation to a resource colony, unable to change government, unable to successfully influence policy, as we've seen in 120 years, and basically be told that you're the embarrassing cousin of Confederation? Would you do it? We wouldn't. But in 1905, Parliament, through an act of Parliament, legislated Alberta into existence. And it wasn't like we got together in a room and decided that we wanted to do this. We were never given a choice. And by the way, the treaties survived that, for those of you that are going to ask about treaties. Why is that important? Well, maybe it's time, for the first time, by the way, not only in Alberta history, but in Canadian history, that the people decide how they want to be governed. Did you know that that is the basic foundation of a free and prosperous society, is that the people decide how they're going to be governed. They decide what the government's going to be allowed to do. They decide what laws they're going to live under, and they do it together. Did you know that we never, ever did that as Canadians, not even just as Albertans? Oh, but Chris, we have the Constitution. We sat down in a room and wrote the Constitution. No, we didn't. No, we didn't. The Canadian Constitution was written in London with some Canadian elite, including John A. Macdonald and Georges Etienne Cartier. They wrote it in London as a way to make sure that the Dominion of Canada continued to be part of the English Empire. That's the reality. The people didn't decide, hey, this is what government we want. The people didn't decide these are the laws we're going to live under. The people didn't decide that Alberta was not going to be allowed to sell their wheat to anybody but the wheat pool. We never decided those things. And maybe it was okay back then because we were infants. We were, as a nation, as a dominion, as a people, we were still infants. Most of the people in this country were just working on surviving, especially in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. There was no real thinking about government or politics or what flag it was. It was like, hey, you know, we got to make sure we have enough grain so we can survive the winter. Do we have enough wood? Those types of things. But things aren't like that anymore. We've grown up. And now because we've felt the pain, we've realized that we can't actually change the situation we're in, and we're established enough, why wouldn't every person in Alberta want to take that type of control back over their lives? Why wouldn't every man, woman, and child in this province want to have a say on how their futures look? I want to choose whether or not I follow Mark Carney into the New World Order. I want to decide if we're going to send men with guns to our ostrich farms and have them slaughter them without testing them. I would like to decide or participate in the decision on whether or not we're going to bully and taunt our peers into taking medical interventions that they don't need. I want to decide those things with my peers. I no longer want to be governed by a document and a government that we had no say in. That's where Alberta is right now. And that's why this is so exciting that we're here in this place at this time. Because we're going to have, did you know this? We're going to have a question in October 19th. There will be a question. And the question is going to be asked of you. The question is, do you agree that Alberta should cease to be a province within Canada and become an independent state? Not a united state, an independent state as in an independent nation. That is a very heavy question. And that is the biggest opportunity anybody, except for Quebec, has had in this country since Confederation, since the Dominion was created, since the province was legislated into existence. We are about to answer a question that will impact decades to come. Now, I've been talking about the prospect and the opportunity of an independent Alberta for years, and here I am telling you that we're actually going to answer this question. We're going to have the referendum. That means that it is so critically important that every single one of you learn as much as you can about our history, where we came from, how we got there, where we could go, what the rules are, what an independent Alberta looks like. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing 200 events in 186 days starting on April 15th. Yes, I know, it's kind of crazy, isn't it? Because if we're going to be asked the question, we have to be able to answer in the most informed way possible. Is there anyone here that doesn't believe that that question that's going to be asked to us is that important? Did you ever think that we were going to get here, or at least this soon? I didn't either. So now we have a really heavy weight on our shoulders. We have a duty to either advocate for or against, whichever answer is in your heart, whichever answer you believe is the right one because of the experiences and the knowledge you've gained until this point. Whether you are a yes or a no, you're going to have to start talking to people. You're going to have to start advocating for your position. You're going to have to, as my friend Adam says, get a little uncomfortable. You're going to have to remove the politeness shackles that tell you it's impolite to talk about religion or politics. Wow, what a scam that was. Don't talk about politics, it's rude. Oh, but wait, politics affects everything in my life, like from before I'm born, whether I am born at all, or until after I'm dead. Maybe that's an important thing to talk about. And religion, well, that part of my life is pretty short, but eternity seems like a pretty long time. So maybe we should be a little bolder in having conversations that might offend people. Every time you go to one of these meetings, I know I haven't given you a lot of information, there will be more. And by the way, I write, I blog, I do podcasts, all that stuff. You can grab one of my cards as you leave tonight if you want some more information on the technical stuff about Alberta, military, currency, policing, borders, international trade, all of those things, all the standard questions, and we're going to ask them tonight. But find the information and be willing to have those conversations. And if you believe in a free and prosperous Alberta, as I do, maybe you're going to have the kind of epiphany that I did. You realize, okay, I'm not just a nobody that has no voice. I kind of am tasked with sharing the truth. I have to have these conversations with people because if I don't, my opponents will, and then we won't end up with the right outcome, or the outcome that I believe is the true and just outcome that we need. So if you are still not on board with the idea of an independent Alberta for any reason, we're going to have a Q&A. We're going to do it right away. I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to talk so long, but I'm very passionate about this subject. And the more I talk about it, the more I realize how important the next few months are. And wow, what an opportunity we have that we can even do this. You folks have an opportunity to tick a box on a piece of paper and form a nation. You folks have an opportunity to give up some of your time and maybe get accosted by people that don't agree with you, to make those types of sacrifices to form a new nation that could be and will be the freest and most prosperous nation on the planet. You don't even have to die. Do you know how many nations were formed over periods of hundreds of years, having hundreds of thousands and millions of people die for that? This is the opportunity Canada has given us. Canada, the Confederation, is not a one-way relationship. It's a relationship between Ottawa and the provinces. And because of that, we can do something that's it's so much more relevant than an election, federal or provincial. It's more relevant than, the referendum questions that are going to be on immigration and those types of things in the fall. So as you leave here tonight, keep that on your mind. Keep that on your mind, what kind of a blessing we have that we're able to do this. And let that guide your actions going forward. I hope that every single person in this room leaves here a disciple of independence. And you want to share this, because that's how we're going to win it. It's not going to be by me speaking to crowds of people and feeding people pierogies, although we're going to do that September next week, or what is it, March 6th, pierogies, Stettler, look for that one. It's going to be from you folks, having conversations with people that you know, you already have a relationship with, they trust you, you can kind of break the ice with these things. It's not going to be me, it's going to be you. No pressure. Anyway, I think that's enough hearing from me. Are we good to go to do a question period? Okay. Yeah, so let's get right into the Q&A, and please don't be shy. If you have an opposition to Alberta independence, I want to hear it. If there's something that you believe is preventing us or is a detriment to be in an independent Alberta, I want to hear it, and I want to talk about it with you, as do the other speakers. So prepare your questions. We're just going to get ready. And thank you very much.
Say the middle position is halfway between right and wrong.
I think you're good.
There's got to be a question.
Okay, I'll start.
Come over here so that it's on the mic. Please.
I don't need a mic.
Yeah, but not online, they won't.
They want to hear you in internet land.
How about that? Perfect. She just had to turn it on. Cool. So I am the one that was putting it out on all the rant and raves. One of the biggest questions that I received was what would happen with our military.
So the question is, what would happen with our military? Before I tell you my opinion on this, because this is just my opinion, the reality is any of these answers are going to be answered by the people of the nation of Alberta. It's not just going to be three guys sitting at the front of a room with a microphone. Let me ask you this. As an Albertan, what are you going to do today to influence the way your military operates, behaves, or is formed? Okay, that's a good point. Somebody said in our military, they shouldn't be wearing dresses. How are we going to accomplish that? If we want to make sure that wokeism isn't prevalent in our armed forces in Canada, how as an Albertan are we going to influence that? We can't. We can't. So if you're going to ask these questions, you should also be understanding that the opportunity is that we can answer them as Albertans. You want my opinion? I'll give you my opinion. I want to see a sovereign Alberta that can protect itself, its people, and help its neighbors out. Right now, we have a few bases in Alberta. We have some equipment here. We have Canadian forces here. I believe that an independent Alberta, as free and prosperous and low taxed as it will be able to attract the best and brightest service people across the country, by the way. I believe that for sure. But we won't have a military right away. So what do? Maybe we hire one. Maybe we contract the United States to provide our defenses. The United States provides secondary defense services for something like, I can't remember what the number is, it's like 18 or maybe 28 different countries across the world. And they provide primary defense for 3. So we could do that. But a sovereign nation requires their own defense, which means we would have to get to work and build it. We can negotiate with Canada to buy some of the equipment, take bases, whatever, But right off the bat, we could easily contract the United States. They love doing that kind of stuff because they're business people and their president loves business deals. So we pay them, they give us forces, we're good to go. Canada's budget for the military, I think in 2019 was something like $13 or $14 billion. It wasn't very much. Coincidentally, we send $27 billion-ish to Ottawa every year, for which we get nothing back. So we could absolutely fund our own military and build one, and influence how it is, by the way. Was that?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I got a question for you here about, I got a question for you on, like, we've got a plan, like everybody's got different ideas how to do it with all these, with the Canadian government and negotiating and everything like that. And so I believe that what we should be focusing on here is we're gonna need three things. We're gonna need a Bill of Rights, inalienable rights. We're gonna need a constitution, because this is gonna be a constitutional republic. And we're gonna also need, well, I can't remember the third one now. But we're gonna have to have this constitution, and it's gonna be something that the people are gonna have to all approve. Because if we're gonna be governed the way we want to be governed, not the way the politicians want. And I don't think we should have a bunch of lawyers and politicians that we've got now writing a constitution for us. And so what is if this plan is, like with the Canada, is to try and negotiate, or once the referendum's done, to negotiate with them, what if they just keep dragging their feet like they're going to do? Because I know they're going to drag it out for years. Do we just take and give them a Declaration of Independence and say, here, this is where we're at?
Like with the process for becoming independent is based upon a Supreme Court decision from 1998 called the Secession Reference Case. Because after the Quebec referendum of 1995, the federal government sent a reference case to the Supreme Court that is asking the Supreme Court its advice on Canadian constitutional law with regard to provincial independence. So the question was the federal government asked Quebec asked the Supreme Court, could Quebec declare independence unilaterally? And the court said no, Quebec could not unilaterally declare independence, but if Quebec held a referendum on independence with a clear question and a clear majority voted in favor, then Quebec could become independent, like would start with negotiations, like you mentioned. So this is where actually the idea of negotiations comes from. It's part of the Supreme Court's process for becoming independent. But they also addressed, like what you said, what if one of the parties is not negotiating in good faith? So presumably, in this case, the federal government. So the Supreme Court went on to say that if, like, there's lots of other democratic countries in the world and they pay attention to each other, and if the democratic countries of the world see that, say, Alberta has voted in favor of independence and the federal government is not negotiating it in good faith, that would put those countries in our favor. And so if some began to recognize our independence, that would kind of preempt what anything the federal government can do. And most importantly would be if the United States acknowledged our independence. Like, let's say we had a referendum on independence and there was a clear question with clear majority, and Canada's dragging its feet, like you mentioned. Like, if we had, say, the current administration in the United States, they would likely be willing to acknowledge our independence. And if the United States acknowledged our independence, there's very little that the federal government of Canada could do. Like, we would be able to, the United States would be able to give us the support that we need, and that would kind of be the end of it. So the key thing would be, if the federal government is dragging its feet, the key thing would be getting international recognition, and then that would kind of preempt anything the federal government would try to do to prevent the province from becoming independent.
So just kind of follow up on that. When we go, everybody on this whole discussion is saying, oh, the federal government, the Supreme Court, an independent Alberta, by choosing to be sovereign, when the people choose that the Canadian law and the Supreme Court of Canada only has jurisdiction there. They wouldn't have jurisdiction in a sovereign Alberta anymore.
Love the way you think.
Alberta has become independent. Once Alberta has become independent, that would be the case. But like the day after the referendum, we're still part of Canada. Like, the referendum starts the process towards independence. Like, we're not independent the next day. It begins the process of negotiations between Alberta and the federal government.
So at what point do we just hand them a Declaration of Independence and say, no, we're done with this, all this negotiation and foot dragging, and we're going to go. And we're going to do it just the way, say, 13 colonies did it to King George, and just give them a Declaration of Independence and say, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, like if they were dragging their feet, like you said, that would have to, at some point we'd have to do that. So, but that's not they have a legal process in place for becoming independent. And so we begin following the legal process because it's there for us. Now, when that legal process gets closed off by them, then we have to resort to what you're talking about.
So if that legal process drags on, at what point do we say that we can't do it here? We either have to go to the international court and stuff and take it from there.
I don't know what the length of time would be. That would depend on the circumstances. Like, you know, the negotiations begin with after the referendum, and then it would depend. Different people would have, I guess it depends on, like I say, it so much depends on what would happen, because we can't say. I mean, maybe the government of Alberta would say you have 1 year to negotiate with us, and after that we're going independent, or 6 months or something. But somebody would have to set a deadline. But I don't know what that deadline would be myself. But like, you're right that there'd have to be some kind of end point at which we take another step if they're not negotiating in good faith.
Let me just wrap that up a little bit. There's a principle that you need to remember. There's only two things required for independence to create a new nation. It's the will of the people and international recognition, nothing else. The Clarity Act, the Supreme Court, Canada, they have a preference how they would like us to do it. That is their preference. International law says those two things is all you need. So here's what I tell people. If you want to have a very, very fast transition from non-sovereign to sovereign, you build the movement. If we have a referendum in Alberta and we get 52% saying yes, that they want Alberta to become an independent state, negotiations are going to take a while. If we have a referendum and 90% said yes, it would be all but guaranteed that we would be independent in a very, very short time. That's how this works. As the will of the people is larger and larger, the time to act on the will of the people is reduced greatly.
I'm just wondering, has anybody come up with a number on a fiscal reality of a separated Alberta? So like what a tax base would be and what expected revenues would be?
So yes, on the Alberta Prosperity Project's website, there is a document called The Value of Freedom. That is quite comprehensive in how it outlines the financial stuff. Just off the top of my head, just talking about what the federal government takes out of Alberta and what they put back in, there is a very large deficit to the tune of $27 or $25 billion. It's a big, big number. So starting only there, the financial benefits and the financial outlook for an independent Alberta is very, very good. And on another point here, you'll hear opposition saying, oh, but nobody's going to trade with you. Oh, but where are you going to send your oil? Well, Canada's not going to let anything go across your borders. Wrong. Trade is mutually beneficial. Do you really believe that a country like Canada, who is often the first sovereign nation to recognize another region that claims sovereignty, by the way, Canada is known for that, do you really believe that they would shoot themselves in the foot to punish Alberta for exercising the democratic will of the people? Not going to happen. Trade benefits both parties. It continues. The dollar is very, very powerful. Yeah.
I actually have quite a few questions. When it comes to the military and Alberta separating, what is the backup plan if the states try and absorb Alberta?
Well, first I want to say that it is extremely unlikely that the United States would try and absorb Alberta. Now, there's a few reasons for that. The biggest is politics. The United States Constitution doesn't allow them to just absorb a sovereign nation. It's not allowed. Congress would have to approve it. It would cause immediate international chaos. The likelihood of that happening is very, very low. If they did, before they did that, they would have to take Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. And they don't want that because they're blue. So the reality is, to gain Alberta, which would probably vote largely Republican, mostly conservative, they would have to take a whole bunch more Democrats, and they don't want to do that. So the appetite, and even the United States has said this plainly, the appetite for them to annex Alberta is non-existent. As a backup plan, I don't know, Canada seems to think that they can defend themselves against the United States military pretty well. Maybe we could contract the Canadian military. I don't know. There are other countries that we could contract from, but the United States, they're our best ally. We trade almost 90% of our total trade with them. They've always been good neighbors, so that's just my opinion on that.
Well, Trump has stated in the past that he is willing to take Greenland with military force. So why would he not want to take Alberta with military force?
Well, for the reasons I explained, it's a little bit different. Greenland is it's a different situation than Alberta with almost 5 million people, developed infrastructure, those types of things, treaty obligations, all those things. Trump is well known for using extreme anchors in negotiation. He wants the deal to benefit him, and so he uses an extreme anchor starting off, poking Justin Trudeau, saying that Canada should just become the 51st state. I don't believe that he actually means those things. I think that when he's saying that stuff, it's a means to an end. And if you look at the way the election turned out, and if you look at the strength of the United States and what they've benefited from the way our government reacted, it really worked for him. So yeah, it's extremely unlikely that the United States would try and absorb a sovereign, independent nation.
Okay, my other question was, when it comes to government-funded jobs, like provincially funded jobs, what does that kind of look like once Alberta separates? Whether it's just top-up wages or full-fledged paid jobs?
Can you just give me an example of a type of job that we're talking about?
Whether it's hospital workers who have top-up wages on top, or daycare workers who have provincially funded top-up wages. So they have their base rate paid from their private daycare, like the private owner, and then the government pays an additional amount on top of the hours that they work.
Like those kind of decisions would be made afterwards? Like there's no position that I'm aware of among people who support Alberta independence as to what that would be. Like after Alberta's independent, we'll still have elections, and so the elected government will make those kinds of decisions, if you know what I mean. So there'll be competitive parties with different views on that perhaps, and it would depend on who gets elected as who'd make those kind of decisions. So that's not the kind of thing that we'd be able to give a concrete answer on, because we don't know what the future government would hold for those kinds of issues. Do you know what I mean?
What I can tell you about that, though, is we would have the opportunity to make those decisions ourselves instead of having stuff come from a government that we can't effectively influence. Like in an independent Alberta, if nurses or whoever was upset with the way the government was treating them, they would be able to effectively change government. Whereas right now, if it's a federal worker of some sort in Alberta, there isn't a hope in heck that we could change government and get those things done. Personally, my opinion on this, and this goes for any type of entitlement that's provided from the federal government, any type of government service or support that we have right now, an independent Alberta would have a moral obligation to make sure that none of those people are left behind. So if I somehow end up as a decision maker or a lawmaker someday by some miracle, I would be advocating for making sure that nobody's left behind. And that's kind of the point with an independent Alberta, is that finally, for the first time, we would be able to take real control of those things. Let's look at healthcare, for instance. Does anybody here know what we spent on healthcare last year in Alberta? It's a big number. $22 billion. $22 billion we spent on healthcare. And our nurses, doctors, frontline workers probably could use some raises and maybe more staff so that they're not overworked the way they are. Imagine having an extra $27 billion a year that's not hemorrhaged to Ottawa to support daycare in Quebec or free post-secondary education in Quebec. Imagine if we had that type of resource here that we could use to improve the lives and working conditions of Albertans. That's the opportunity here. And like Michael said, it all comes down to us continuing to do what we're doing, being involved, and supporting the people who want to pass laws that benefit us in those ways. And that's the opportunity that we don't have right now.
All right. Okay. Terribly complex. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I was like, ooh, there's a bunch of courage there. I'm going to throw out an idea. I don't like the idea of Alberta being independent, caught. I'm thinking maybe a little bigger, like British Columbia, Yukon, it's like Washington, Idaho, Montana, right? And then, it's like, because understandably, here in our province, and Saskatchewan, of course, I'm like, Saskatchewan's in the same kind of boat as we are, without having any political influence, because it's all run, right, by Ontario. It's like, so yeah, how do we get political influence? Okay, so that would be the big picture. It's like, go big or go home.
That's a very interesting concept and something that can be considered. But the problem is that it can't be considered until we answer for Alberta. We can only answer for ourselves. Saskatchewan can only answer for themselves. BC can only answer if after everybody decides that they want to become independent, we decide to form a nation with all of us, then that can be done at that time. But it can't, every one of the provinces and the territories have to do it themselves.
Well, can you send out an invite to it's like, you're like, hey, and Northwest Territories and Aleutian Islands. I'm like, that's Canada to me. I've been there, done that. It's like,
and I understand where you're coming from, but under the Clarity Act, each area has to make their decision themselves. So that answer cannot be even, an invite can't be sent out until each one of them has made the decision themselves to become an independent nation. So if Saskatchewan decides, which there's a huge movement there, if Saskatchewan decides to become independent and Alberta becomes independent, they for sure could decide as the people of each province if they want the other one as a partner.
I think it's a good idea.
I don't argue, but it has to be done.
I'm like, what about
step by step?
Saskatchewan. Talking resource. And America's got themselves in a little bit of a bind over fertilizer, potash, and petroleum, and in northern Saskatchewan, the highest concentration of uranium on the planet coming out of McCarthy River. Come out into.
I have to interrupt you. We can, if you want, we can talk about this after, but we got to get through the question. So if there's another question, we'll take the question. But if not, then we'll have a discussion after.
Well, actually, there would be about 14 other questions, but I'll just let it pass.
Okay, we can talk after for sure.
How are you going to implement that?
Good.
Can I hold it?
Very good question, but it's a very complicated one.
First of all, I'd like to thank the three individuals that came out to speak to us tonight and for your contribution to the information that you've provided. One of the things that really frustrates me is when I learned that all the MPs that were voted in, they don't swear allegiance to us, the constituents who voted them in. They swear their allegiance to the King. And so we really have nobody representing us. And I think we need that. And so I wonder if any one of you could give us a little more information on is it the 1984 Act where the Queen declared that each portion of the Canadian provinces could declare their independence?
I don't have an answer for you, but I'll find out.
Yeah, please do, because there was a declaration by the Queen that allowed each province within Canada, if they wanted to declare independence, that they could, their sovereignty, they could do that. And I would like to know more about that. And now we've lost my train of thought, sorry. But yeah, I have a problem with what's happening in Canada where we don't have anybody actually representing us as constituents who vote our politicians into power. So we need to do something. Thank you.
It's not just in Ottawa, it's also in the legislature. There's only one politician in this province that did not swear allegiance to the Crown, and that's Todd Loewen. The rest of them have all swore allegiance to the Crown.
And secrecy.
I'm just wondering, what have you guys heard is the best argument against separation? Because I've heard nothing. Like, it's all just traitors and...
Patriotism, emotion. Those are the two most prevalent arguments against it. How could you? You're a traitor. We'll always be Canada. Don't you love the people? Why do you want to leave us? Those types of things. But a more tangible argument I've heard is, well, it's going to be hard, and it will be hard, right? It's not going to be easy. We're going to have a lot of work to do. We have to build new things. We have to change letterhead for a lot of bureaucracy. It's going to be a pain in the butt for sure. There's going to be economic turmoil for a period, hopefully a short period. So that would be an argument against. But when you weigh that against what we'd be working towards, the opposing argument is so diminished. Like, imagine this argument against Alberta because of the hard work we're going to have to do after we become independent is like a little shrub, and it's sitting there, and we're walking on this path, and we're like, oh man, we don't want to walk on this path. There's a shrub there. We're going to have to go around it. But once you get around it, it's just beautiful, clear sailing, nothing to trip on. Well, I mean, if we pay attention and stay involved. But that's the biggest one I've heard.
Gosh, can I add to that then?
Yeah.
Okay, it's kind of along the lines of what you're saying, but I was actually asked this question at a different meeting. They said, what's the best argument you've heard against independence? Well, like kind of taking off from what Chris said, the biggest argument against independence that I really believe is the risk that we're taking. Like, we're doing something that's never been done before, so there's no pathway to follow. Who knows what could happen? Like, all kinds of potential bad things could happen. So we are taking a risk in moving towards independence. There's no question about that. But staying with Canada also involves risk. So it's not a question of making a decision, safety versus risk. It's risk either way. So you got to calculate how much risk are you willing to take, because it is going to be risky to go in for independence. Staying with Canada is also risky because we have a government that wants to shut down our economy and is increasingly taking away our rights and freedoms. So is that something you're willing to risk, in a country that's going to take away your rights and freedoms? We have to. So it's a balance, but there is a risk in going to independence. There's no question there is a risk, but there's a risk in staying in too. So you got to balance off which risk you're willing to go with.
I have two questions. The first question that I have is, can you speak to the support that you have in urban centers versus rural Alberta?
I don't have any numbers for you, but I will say that I've spoken at a number of events in urban centers, and they're generally packed. I mean, let's face it, Edmonton, not really super aligned with rural values. That it is what it is. How relevant it is, I don't know. I believe that almost every argument against Alberta independence that's been presented to me, I've been able to chew that up and spit it out as an argument for independence. Like the biggest one, or the easiest one, is landlocked. Oh, we're going to be landlocked. Well, how are you going to move your stuff to Tidewater? I'm like, okay, well, are we landlocked right now? Are we having a great time moving our resources to Tidewater? Do we go to jail if we bring cigarettes from another province and don't pay a tax on them? Like, come on, right? So, yeah, it's all I guess it's perspective, right?
There's no question, like from my experience, support for independence is way higher in rural areas. There's no question about that. And it's way lower in Edmonton. And so Calgary is kind of going to be the turning point. Like if we were to have the vote today, I think most rural areas would vote overwhelmingly in favor of independence. Edmonton would vote probably against independence by overwhelmingly. And so Calgary would be the kind of the toss-up jurisdiction. It's kind of like in provincial elections. It's very much the same. That's kind of how I understand it right now.
Another question is just reaching out to the younger people that have an opportunity to vote. So in our house, we have a lot of conversation around what has changed in the last 20 years. And what I've noticed with our young people is they've grown up in a world where they haven't noticed things have been taken away because they didn't know that they didn't have them or that they did have them. So my question is, in terms of reaching out to young people, what would you offer for tools and resources that is not simply we need to run away and think about ourselves, but more importantly, we need to think about a bigger picture? And then my second part to that is, how do you ensure that a governing body doesn't make the same selfish decisions for an Alberta versus Ottawa?
One of the things I'm going to use Rimbey as a little bit of an example. In the Rimbey meeting, we had a bunch of kids show up, and it was absolutely amazing. They got involved. They came up to the mic and were asking questions on how it was going to affect them. And I think that's the biggest thing. Get them to meetings like this so they can find out what it means for them. Because, believe it or not, I'm not doing this for me. I'm on the shorter end of the stick at this point in time. So I'm doing it for the next generations. I see what's happening now, and it's going to be impossible for them. So get them to come to this type of meeting and get them involved. Like one girl was from the university was there, and she was trying to figure out how. I said, you just got to get involved with even the Conservative Club. It's time that you're going to have to step up, not be a shrinking violet, because it is your future that is going to be affected at this point. So it's getting them out to learn what it's at stake for them, because it is all about them.
So your question about how do we prevent corruption is my favorite question of all time. How do we prevent corruption in government right now? Would you like to be able to? Imagine if our Constitution gave us actual explicit right to free speech. Did you know that we don't have that, by the way? We have the right to thought, freedom, and expression. We do not have free speech. A man was just fined $750,000 in British Columbia for misgendering someone. $750,000. If you want to hold politicians accountable, you constitutionally enshrine the mechanisms to do so. The first being free speech. The second one being the right to bear arms. Not that we want to use them. The third one being the right to a well-regulated militia to protect against government tyranny. That way, when the government comes and they say, we're going to seize your cafe because somebody might sneeze and get somebody else sick, by the way, we're going to destroy a bunch of people's lives in the process, you can say, no, you're not. Right now in this country, we have no means by which we can defend ourselves. It's actually illegal to defend yourself against the government. Did you know that? It is illegal. If you hang a fly swatter by your entryway and you label that fly swatter RCMP deterrent, and you think you're going to defend yourself with that fly swatter, it could be anything. That's illegal, and it's a criminal offense. If the government can do whatever they want, how do you hold them accountable and prevent corruption? How many corruption scandals have we seen in the past 20 years out of government? It is sickening. And how many times have we ever seen anyone held accountable? Zero. Zilch. Nothing. This is the point. The whole point is the Constitution. Imagine if you had in your Constitution a provision like a Doge provision, where every year or every 2 years there was public audits of every project that was publicly funded, and you and me got to look at the numbers. Imagine what that would do for reducing corruption. This is why the opportunity is so great, because that Constitution that we're going to work on together is going to set the stage to accomplish all these things, every single one of them. And it's the only way to do it, because if we rely on government and elections and statute law to try and fix things, well, we get complacent, we drop the ball, we get a different government with different ideologies, and they pass laws that allow more corruption. How many times have we seen that? You can't do that if the Constitution explicitly prevents it. Well, yeah, maybe, yes, absolutely, yeah. You know, one of the things that really got me to push harder in advocacy was when I watched news coming out of British Columbia from Victoria, where people were being forced to say goodbye to their mother as she passed on an iPad. The rage that built in me when I realized what those people were losing because of what the government was doing, that is never going to go away. When I watched, and still to this day, can you believe this? Still to this day, people come to the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta. They come there to meet me. They want to shake my hand. And then they tell me their stories. And the stories I hear to this day, man, I could write 4 books. You know, I've met people that said goodbye to their parents or one of their parents on an iPad. I have met people that lost their job and their home and their car and their families were destroyed because of the mandates. I've met people who are physically disabled because they did what the government said they should do, and it certainly wasn't what they should have done. And this isn't just 1 or 2 people, folks. This is thousands of people. This is 2026 now. That stuff was 4 years ago. And I still have people coming into my cafe talking about it. So if you don't believe that I want some accountability from government, you should probably take a look at my lawsuit. I'm actually a lead plaintiff in a lawsuit against a class action lawsuit against the Alberta government right now because of what they did to us. And it was illegal what they did to us. And if we had had a constitution that would have let us defend ourselves against tyrannical government back then, we would have ended it before it even began. That's what we need in Alberta. How bad does it have to get before we do something? No, it doesn't have to get any worse. We're doing it right now, right? Are we doing it now? Are we going to be advocates for an independent Alberta? Are we going to get uncomfortable and have those conversations that society tells us are impolite to have? Wow, come on, get excited about that one. It's fun. We don't have to wait any longer.
No more RCMP.
Should have done a long time ago. That's it? Okay, that's it.
Well, thank you, everyone, for coming out. I know there's some of you who are heading over to the pet grooming store, Pretty Paws, because they're collecting signatures over there. And for the rest of you, I just wish you a safe journey home, and thank you again for coming out.